And they decided that they would have a party for those who were at home to consume the rest. 15 couples showed up at the party, and it was great. The mushrooms were great. Somebody happened to be walking through the kitchen and noticed that the cat, who had just been fed some of the mushrooms, was foaming at the mouth, having convulsions, flipping, flopping on the kitchen floor. They noticed that that was strange. They ran in and told the hostess that, I think something's wrong with your cat. The hostess came in, she said, oh my goodness, it's got to be the mushrooms. She called the doctor, his friend, and he said, well, you know, we can't be too careful with something like this. You better all come down. So they all left, and you can imagine 30 gurneys stretched out in the hallway there as each one had his or her respective stomachs pumped. After that had been taken care of and everybody was feeling as good as you can under those circumstances, they came back home. They had to come back to the same house because they left so quickly that they left all their coats there. They were saying things like, thank you so much for inviting me, I sure had a good time. Somebody happened to wander through the kitchen, and lo and behold, there on the floor was the cat and 8 kittens. The moral of the story is the signs are always there. The hard part is determining what they mean. Now see, the tenors got that right away. And the sopranos got it next. I want to introduce to you the most adequate person I know. Your host for this evening, Mr. Branch Boat.
Good old Bob, bless his heart. Leave it to Bob Elber to wind up an evening where we're all eating dinner telling a joke about stomachs being pumped. Tactful as ever, Bob. Thank you very much. Thanks especially to the warm reception from the senior citizens table. It's nice to see Dosker Manor so well represented. I want you to know I prepared for the evening by going through about this many Motet itineraries. Because it's been like almost 20 years since I've been in the group, and I kind of want to get myself back into things. And so I read the early trip itineraries, and I went through the middle years, and then finally up to 1980 or 82, whatever it was. And I discovered something very amazing. Time stands still with this group. The early itineraries were just like the late itineraries. It was like, I knew we had a kinship spirit between the older people in the middle group and the later group. I didn't know we were interchangeable. And I'll tell you what I mean. Was in the early itineraries, I used to write these little semi-funny things about people on itineraries, you know. Semi-funny. Janet always thought it was semi-funny, because she was usually the target of it. But then I read those, and I remember that. And I got down to later years, and it's the same stuff. Dave has taken all my stuff, and he's crossed out the other names and put in new people's names. And I admit I was a little upset about this, you know, for his Dave plagiarizing my work. But I thought, you know, after all, when you conceive deathless prose such as rest stop, fill up the bus and empty the people, that type of great literature deserves to be preserved. I appreciate Dave doing it. There was a lot of similarity. Well, there was something different. I mean, the price of a tour went from about $14 to $57.50, which isn't bad considering inflation and the annual contribution to Dave's secret retirement fund. But actually, the funniest thing about all that stuff I looked at were the rules. Now I brought. You're right. They are funny, right? I mean, I looked at them and I say, gee, these are really archaic in this day and age. That's how they thought back in 1957 they were archaic. I brought 1971, it could have been anything. You know, they're all about the same. And one thing, well, first let me tell you that the first tour didn't have any rules. We got together and we said, should we have any rules? And Dave said, and Dave was always good at making these kind of command decisions. He said, no, we don't need any rules. I mean, after all, we're responsible teenagers and young adults. We don't need any rules. Well, the second year, we had 2 pages of rules on legal paper, single space. And here they are today. Now, what some of the younger, I use younger, no, they're just mid-30s, you kids, may not know is that all these rules, behind each of these rules was a story. I mean, relax, Janet, I'm not going to tell them all. All right, you're safe, kid. Okay. No, I'm not going to tell them. But you know, that's the way it was. You know, David would look around and he'd see, oh, I'll write that down. We won't have that next year. And so they're about hand, every single one of these, there's something that happened. And you know, they're kind of like names attached, as you remember back through the years. For instance, here's one, number 12, which says, be careful about getting into controversial discussions. This is known as the Gene Cassidy rule. So named for the base that almost got us lynched in Selma, Alabama. Now, you have to picture this. This is late 50s, Selma, Alabama. And you've all been through it. You finish your concert on a Sunday or whatever night it was, you go back to your host homes, right? And so we're sitting in the living room floor with a bunch of good old boys. And we're talking about practically nothing, and all of a sudden Cassidy says, you know what you folks in Selma need is integration. I mean, this is 1950s in Selma, Alabama. That is world-class dumb, folks. I mean, we should have known better. We went up in our beds and we took the blankets off the bed, and then the sheets had slits in them. But you have to think about that, so you're older than you look. Then there was this rule. I always like this. Stay with group at all times, unless you have permission to wander. Never go anywhere by yourself. This is known as the Pat Dixon rule. So-called the fact that Pat did wander by herself one time in Biloxi, Mississippi, and came back with half the naval base. And poor Dave had to explain to about 400 sailors why they couldn't get on the bus. Then, of course, there is the most famous and, of course, the most ignored rule of all, which states, to those attracted to the opposite sex, hand-holding only. You all remember that. How many live by that rule? Thank you. Oh, Larry Penny's hands up. That's hilarious. That's even funnier over there. This is known, of course, as we all know, as the Ann and Larry Roberts rule. Actually, they were the most inventive people at getting around that I had ever seen in my life. They were the only people I ever knew who could hold each other's hands through 4 layers of each other's clothing. I mean, it was, well, actually, after we were all little married people, I finally got Larry alone, and I said, Larry, you know, legends are one thing, but I gotta ask you, were you and Ann really that sexually adventurous back then? And he looked at me and said, would you believe standing in a hammock? I said yes. Actually, before I leave the rules, I wonder if you ever took the time to read that rule carefully. It says, quote, to those attracted to the opposite sex, hand-holding only. What if you're attracted to the same sex? Does that mean you could do any damn thing you wanted to? I always meant to ask Dave that. Luckily, the subject didn't come up. Well, there were a couple of baritones who were kind of learning about it. Well, I'm happy we're all here to celebrate the years in the Motet, as we call it. Ah, yes, the Motet. That strange name. I didn't know what it was either when I got in. I thought it was a carburetor part. That was what everybody said. Well, actually, somebody came into high school. It actually happened and said, "You want to join the Motet?" And I said, "Does it have girls in it?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Count me in." So when I got in, I asked Jimmy Jones, Dave's brother, I said, "How did they get the name Motet?" He said, with a straight face, he looks at me and said, "Well, you see, when Dave started this out, it was just Dave and one other person. He called it a duet. And they got 2 more people, and he called it a quartet. He got 4 people, and he called it octet. And they got more people, and he called it a motet." I soon learned that you couldn't trust Jimmy Jones. He was strange, and still is. But the Motet, actually, as you all know, I think most of you know, the original name was the St. Paul Acapella Motet Singers, sometimes of Louisville, Kentucky, which, as Shakespeare would say, is not a name that flows trippingly off the tongue. So it was no wonder it was shortened to the Motet, which didn't solve any problems because then you had to explain to everybody what the devil a motet was. I mean, for instance, we were on tour down south. We had to explain to people from Alabama that motet did not mean, for example, more than one tet. And then there was that one some of you may remember this happening. And if you didn't remember it, you can imagine along with us because you've all been in the same situation. Imagine it, it's a Sunday night concert. And you're all up on the risers. We were all up on the risers, we're ready to go. And I have my pitch pipe, and I'm ready to blow an E flat, or now at every tone, of course, which we start every concert with. And Davis, you know, in his vulture pose, ready to go. And the Baptist minister steps up and says, "Brothers and sisters, we at the First Baptist Church are very happy to have with us from Louisville, Kentucky, Director Dave Jones and the St. Paul Acapella Motel Singers." It happened. It really, anybody remember that? Remember that? Remember that? It happened. It really did. I don't remember the church. And in the defense of the poor guy, it must be admitted that if you peeked in the back of the tour bus from time to time, you may think that name was not particularly inappropriate. I think the name Motet was what kind of got us into trouble. And now, for those of you, again, from the younger people, in the early days of the Motet, there was kind of a paradox. We were a very successful group, but we got a lot of flack from the, quote, musicians because of a whole lot of things. First was the name Motet. Sam Adkins, who was one of the earliest supporters of the group, did the first major article on the group in which he called it a very fine choral group and a misnomer, which of course it is, because motet by the strict dictionary definition in its early days meant a piece of music dating from the late medieval period, could be secular or sacred, polyphonic piece, and it was written by guys named Guillaume de Machaut and Josquin Dupré, who weren't really high on Dave's hit parade. And so we really never sang motets. But even by the later definition, the word motet means a piece of music, not a bunch of people singing a piece of music. And so the musicians said, they don't even know what they are. So we got a little abstract, and we thought it was very unfair. Well, you really had, well, to be honest, there were a few idiosyncrasies about the early group that, you have to admit. There was the programming, which, it didn't follow the traditional type of music program from period to period to period early to late. It kind of hopped around like we're in a perpetual time warp from this to that. And the musicians didn't care much for that. And then we got a lot of static about the Motet theme song, Now Let Every Tongue Adore Thee, which they view as Wache auf und die Stimme from Bach's Chorale Cantata number 140, a very stately cantata. And we remember singing it this afternoon. It was a relatively sane performance. And I've noticed in 20 years, Dave has ameliorated his approach to that piece of music. In the early days, he took it it kind of approached acute hyperactivity, is what it did. We did it once in 17.5 seconds, which is still in the Guinness Book of World Records as the fastest Bach chorale ever sung. But I suppose the thing that got us the worst flack was Dave's innovations in choral conducting. And that's what they were, they're innovation. I thought the criticism was really off base, but I think of Dave as a pioneer in choral conducting. He invented the phrase, stagger your breathing. As a matter of fact, when Dave did it, stagger was a very apt choice of word, because after you do it for four or five pages and not taking a breath, you're about ready to do that. Dave was the first one ever to carry over phrases. Sorry, light. Oh, hell with it. He was the first one to carry a phrase through a comma, or a semicolon, or a period. once carried over from one song to the next. It was a wild time. But Dave's greatest contribution to choral conducting, I feel, was something that is called in Grove's musical dictionary today, the sudden, uncalled for, unwanted decrescendo. Now, I was privileged to be there the first time he decided to do that. And let me just take you back, because I think some of you can understand what it is. I don't remember the piece of music, I confess that. But it was one of those things where it was all a very praise text, right? And you've all sung those. And so the text is real praise God, and it comes to the end, and the notes, I know the tenors are up on a G, and everyone else is high up in the voice. And the dynamics were marked. It had more F's in it than a subway station. And we're in there, and you got to picture this. They call it, only the big city folks saw that one. How about the back of a cart bus, Harry? Okay, well, you get the picture, right? And we're there, and we are really into it. You have to get right with this, because you have to feel it the way we were. We were really into it, and our mouths were open, and we were giving a good forte, and Dave is going like this, and we're getting louder and louder, and we're going like this, and like this, and our mouths are wide open, and we're pumping all the air in. We're listening to great sound. We're looking at Dave, and we're going like this, and listen, he's going more like this, and we're looking at Dave. We know he's going to cut us off soon, and we're ready, and all of a sudden he does this. And I remember my reaction, just like it was yesterday. It must have been 30 years ago or something like that. What the hell was he doing? That's a decrescendo. And you know, in those moments in crisis in your life when all these millions of thoughts pass through your head, and it was only about 2 seconds, I remember. But you know, the first message you get is from your brain. That's the brain's job when kind of weird stuff goes down, and the brain tells you about it. And I said, oh, he's doing something weird. And then you hear from your throat, and it says, I'm hurting. I hear from my ears, and actually, this guy is making strange sounds. The lungs are saying, I'm about out down here. The brain is now reacted to the whole thing and saying, I can't handle this, let's just shut the whole thing down. So the last thing I remember is my brain telling me, see Jones after the concert. So I did. I waited, of course, until the crowd cleared away. There was always a crowd around Dave after a concert telling how good it was. I could picture it. Some little old lady going to Dave and saying, "I'm Mr. Jones. I loved the concert, especially the part where you did that, and all the tenors and sopranos bled from their ears." So I waited. This is true, folks. I am not making this up. My vocal cords still have scars. But, no, I waited and I went up to Dave. And I said, Dave, I got to ask you about that piece we did right before the end. He said, yeah. I said, Dave, at the end of the text is a praise God thing, you know. He said, yeah. I said, we're all on IGs for heaven's sakes. He said, yeah, I know. I said, Dave, the dynamic mark is F, 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 forte, fortissimo, right? He said, yeah, I know. I said, what the hell were you doing? He looked at me with a straight face, didn't blink an eye, and said, I felt it. True. That wasn't the end of it. Of course, he liked that, so he kept on doing it. Every time he said, what'd you do that for? He said, I felt it. Now, we got the feeling after a while that what he thought he was feeling was some kind of heavenly force descending upon him. Maybe it was Cecilia, the patron saint of music, sitting on his shoulder and saying, okay, Dave, let's get the tenors and sopranos again today. We were more apt, actually, members of the group were more apt to chalk it up to acid indigestion or constipation or the heartbreak of psoriasis or anything, but we had a feeling it really wasn't that. And Dave, I think, would have gone on forever doing that, except we went on tour. And you know how it is on tour. You do a concert. At the end of the second concert, after all this was going on, he's playing these little games with our voices. Some of the higher voices came up to Dave and said, Dave, I really don't think I'm going to be able to sing the rest of the tour. And those were the sopranos. You can imagine what the tenors sounded like. And so, so he agreed to give it up, and we got back from tour. We made him join Dave Crescendo's Anonymous, and every month he had to go to a meeting and stand up and say, "My name is Dave Jones, and I do unwanted Dave Crescendos. My last unwanted Dave Crescendo was in April this year, and 2 tenors died," and sit back down. And he was doing pretty well with this, and then Carol Jordan joined the group. Well, you remember Carol from today. You remember Mary Had a Baby, right? First time she does that, it's got this high G of my Lord, right? We're ready to do her thing. And Dave suddenly does this thing. Well, I don't know why all of a sudden he did it again. And she just does it, you know. She has a forte, goes up, mezzo forte, mezzo piano, piano, pianissimo. She was a little raspy thing like a Dave is like he rediscovered Santa Claus. And so we're back in the whole thing again. Thanks. It was nice. I kid Carol. We were, good friends. Everyone loved Carol. And vice versa. It's impossible not to like someone whose ambition in life is to date every single tenor in the United States before the age of 21. So we really liked her, but we did have this kind of grudge against her. Before we go on, I want the record to show that I got my revenge on David, and the punishment really fit the crime. I don't know how many have ever done the echo carol, Wild Out My Sheep, a Christmas thing, a little chorus and a quartet or echo, right? So we're doing this, and the chorus is up there, and Dave's directing with me and a bass and a soprano and a tenor. We're out in the cloister somewhere, we're doing the echo. So we get to the end of the thing, and for those of you who don't know it, the last line of the tenor goes something like, "Praise we the Lord in heaven on high," and then the echo does the same thing. Okay, so they get the end of the piece, and Dave goes, and all the tenors goes, "Praise we the Lord in heaven on high," and I go, "Praise we the Lord in heaven on high," thereby making it a major and breaking all the rules of sonics and almost causing Dave to have a heart attack. Well, I will give Dave this. First of all, he knew something was wrong, and secondly, he got through the whole concert. Then after the concert, he headed right for me. I knew I had him. He came up to me and said, "You know that Wild Out My Sheep?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "What the hell were you doing?" I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, the thing's written as a C natural." I said, "Yeah, I know." I said, "Well, you echo, if you sing it in A minor and the echo's in A major, that's ridiculous." I said, "I know." He said, "What the hell were you doing?" I said, fun and for a little revenge too. I mean, after 28 years, we're entitled to one night, I guess. But when we laugh at all these things, along with Dave, we're obviously laughing at ourselves because we were at the very least accomplices in everything the Motet singers did, good, bad, and everything in between. Most of it very, very good. And we have a succession of people who are going to parade up here, and I have no idea what they're going to do. I'm like Bob Epper. I'm very unimportant at this point. I just get to read names, and I don't know what we're going to do. But we're kind of trying to get a cross-section of people who've been in the group early years to late years to kind of reminisce and take us back. And the first gentleman is you've heard from him before, the Reverend Larry Petty, who's pastor of Pleasant Grove Baptist Church. What can I say about Larry? It was really kind of surprised to find out that he's in this line of work. I mean, he and Bard Robert used to audition all the sopranos and altos in a car. But it's good to know that Larry Petty has traded in his black book for the good book. And so here is Larry Petty.
I mean, what an act to follow. I mean, goodness gracious. Last night, I felt good when I finally found somebody I recognized and realized that there were some people as old as I am with the group, but I really felt kind of out of place when everybody was watching all of these tapes. And finally I went up to Dave and I said, "Dave, where's our tapes?" He said they didn't have tapes until 1959. And the little things, they had the uniforms with the little things on them and all that, and we didn't have that. We had coats, I think the girls did have jumpers or something. And, you know, they take these tours. I looked at that article in the paper. They went to the White House to sing for President Tricky Dick. And, you know, I remember that. Reading in the paper, and I thought to myself, boy, where was our tour? The one tour I went on, Oil City, Pennsylvania. How's that? Yeah. Yeah, it was a great tour. But I remember some fun times we did have, you know, singing for High Varieties, and then what was it, the Crusade for Children chorus, 2 or 3 years I was in that. And they had the singer Edie Gourmet and Steve Larson. Nobody ever heard of them before, but I remember that very vividly. And but I'm really indebted to the Motet for the cultural influence on my life. Really. I mean, for 30 years, I've been able to sing the baritone part to Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And that, you know, that's talent. And I can sing favorites like Brent's taught me, Yokohama Mama. Was in Yokohama, I met this hot mama. Serving radishes, octopus, rice, and dried squid. That's talent. And then there were some songs we learned that weren't even in the repertoire, like National Embalming School. You remember that? Yeah. And then we had those shows where variety shows where we sang things like Skinny Marink, Dinky Dink, and all of those, you know, cultural songs. It really, and it prepared me to sing in church choirs and things like that too, because I'm disciplined now. It took a while, Bart always got me in trouble. He really did. Yeah, I sometimes at night, in the middle of the night, I wake up in a cold sweat. Dave's yelling at me, you know, or stomping his foot. But I do want to close with one real, live, true incident that did happen, which shows you Dave's genius and my stupidity or something. But we were in Oil City, Pennsylvania, on our tour, and I developed a case of sore throat, laryngitis, whatever, and I could not sing, and I had a little bit of a solo in one of the numbers we were doing, and I went to Dave and said, Dave, what are we going to do? And he said, well, don't worry about it. He said, I'll sing it, and you move your mouth. This is true. This is true. Dave was up there directing, as usual, how's that? Up there directing, and all I did was mimic the words, and he sang with his back to the congregation. Went over. I could use him on Sunday morning occasionally. Dave, whenever you're ready. Thank you very much.
One of the big surprises we had early on was in pop concerts when a couple of the more quiet members of our group suddenly kind of shed that image and got up and there they were with the guitars doing material that was probably not quite good enough for hee-haw because you didn't expect Dave Richards and Gary Hathaway to do that. I mean, they were just kind of seemed like nice, quiet, introverted sort of people, and then all of a sudden there they were doing all that stuff. But they were so bad they were fabulous. I mean, they were really great. And, you know, they kind of did an imitation of Homer and Jethro from Grand Ole Opry. Of course, most of you have never heard of Homer and Jethro, I guess. But that's okay. You probably never heard of Dave Richards and Gary Hathaway either. That's fine, too. So in case you haven't, here they are.
I always knew I was destined for great things. When I started in Motet, here's a little example of how far I've gone. Please help me, I'm falling. She's done it again. Slammed the door on my finger when I tried to get in. She hauled off best if I had. I wish you would quit it before I get mad. Go down to the river where the water is nice. Stick your head under 3 times and pull it out twice. If you tell me you believe me, then you wanted to stay. Oh, how can I miss you when you won't go away? Please help me, I'm falling for somebody new. Anything I wind up with will be better than you. Go have your face lifted, it needs it no doubt. Go to Peter Pan's beauty shop before your pan peters out.
You often wonder when you introduce somebody if they're going to be just the way you introduce them. And luckily, Dave and Gary lived up to their billing. A friend of mine just once described the vocal production of sopranos and saying that the reason they can hit all those high notes is they have all that resonating space in their head where other people have brains. And I was going to say that of course does not apply to this group. With that introduction, here's Belinda Linderman.
I'll restrain myself and not say what we used to call you. And it's real tough, let me tell you. No, I guess I'm one that went twice around, and the second time I think was more fun. You said to say a few things maybe about Dave or some of the things that went on, and there were several things. I think one thing that happened on a tour when I came back the second time was that for some unknown reason, Dave put me on the back row, and I'm not that tall, and for some reason also, I think I was between John Canor and Darryl Curry, and I had Richard Smiley in front of me, and if any of you are familiar with them, you can figure that at that point I could hear nothing. And as you know, on tours we have kind of an interesting variety of food, which sometimes doesn't sit too well. It's a digestive system. And we had what was known on that tour as the Green Wave. It was grim. I mean, you would be ready to go, you know, for one of these G's or A's and take in a big breath, and you were through. And so for some reason, and I was, you know, I was old and tired, I think. I was about 35 at this point. I was tired. And I was standing up there, and for some reason, I got tickled. And I started laughing, and at this point, I was very thin. I was just a little over 100 pounds. And these two guys, we were so jammed on the risers because we were one riser short. The church was small, and my feet were not on the riser. I was between the two guys. And so I kind of started to be like, and Darryl could feel me laughing, and I thought, I've got to get off the riser. So I kind of scooched down and fell off the back of the riser almost into the altar rail. And I was hysterical behind the risers laughing. Well, I had started giggling, and Darryl obviously was a little tired too and had the green wave. So he comes down with me behind the risers. We were both choking to death, and it's one of these real quiet songs. I mean, it's breathing this, it was awful. And we're trying not to snort and holler behind the risers. And then Bob McDonald came around to check because he thought we were overcome with emotion. He was that was a lot of fun. But that thing persisted. that green wave throughout the entire tour that year. Of course, we all know that Dave is quite a perfectionist, and we were out in Nebraska. Kathy Coco reminded me of this today. And we were out in Nebraska singing at her brother's church, and it was one of our songs that had like 3 different sections with, one would be slow and one fast. I don't know all the words for them, but you know what I mean. And so we're whipping through this thing, and we've just finished the 2nd movement, and the 3rd movement was one of those that comes in very quickly. So as everyone finished, we all went, and Dave just cut it off. And he forgot the last section. We all had gone, and so we just sang, Amen. The look on Dave's face was terrific. I mean, it was one of, I think one of my favorite Dave stories came, I guess, sometime in the 70s, and I can't remember if this was Nashville or where, but Dave was up, with this number, and all of a sudden, at the beginning of the concert, he would stand, can everybody see me? Everybody had to see him, so then he would stand where he knew we could see him. We started moving towards us, and if you're mashed up in the 3rd row, you're in big trouble if you can't see, around all these people. And he kept moving closer and closer, and I thought, gee, Christmas. You could sort of see an arm waving somewhere up here. And we were nearing the end of the song, and all of a sudden, all you could see was the tip of this hand waving. Dave had come up to the front row and had his hand flat right here on Valerie Morton O'Dell's chest. She had fainted, and he was holding her up. So, the show must go on. It was terrific. And it really was awfully funny because he finished and you could just barely see the top of his hand. He let go and she just came right. It was absolutely phenomenal. It was really, that was the way it always was. Is we always carried through, no matter if it was a green wave, it was a fade, or whatever it was. And I guess those are some of the most fun things I remember.
The green wave. I'm glad I missed that one. Sam Gifford has been a friend of the Motet Singers since the early days, not just with his association with WHS and High Varieties, but for the group itself. By way of introducing Sam, I want to tell you a little story on him, which he probably doesn't remember. Sam, of course, was the host of High Varieties, and High Varieties was sponsored by Frisch's. The people are deciding whether they get rid of the big boy or not. Well, in those days, they had the Frisch's Big Boy of the Week. And they had 4 Frisch's restaurants, and some of you remember this, right? They had, every week, they'd vote for the favorite Big Boy of the Week, and they'd all come on the show, and they'd sit back there on the little bar stools, and it was always the same complement. Different guys, but always the same complement of people. It'd be 3 football players from out in Dixie Highway, and a little skinny Jewish kid from Taylorsville Road. And the names changed, but it was the same 4 people, right? And Sam would get up there and he'd go segue right from the show into this Frisch's commercial, and you got to picture this because the setup is very important. You have to visualize this. The last thing is when he gives the little thing about how wonderful Frisch's is. All the 4 big boys have these 4 big boy sandwiches in front of them, and a cue from the floor director. The big boys pick up the big boys, start munching them while the camera pans. Okay, you got the picture? This every Saturday in High Varieties this happened. Every Saturday, and Sam would do the commercial, and the big boys would eat the big boys. Well, we were working the floor that time, floor directors that time, and we were up to here with the big boys. I mean, they thought they were hot. They thought they were hot. I mean, they came to the studio, we're the big boys of the week. Wow, whoopee. And so we got a little irritated after several months of this, and the same old thing over and over. So one day we got the hold of the big boy sandwiches, and we added some of it, as Colonel Sanders would say, are some secret ingredients. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly what the special sauce was, but I know its base was red pepper. I remember that. Maybe a little chocolate syrup, and it was nice. And we kind of put it on the big boy sandwiches, and we put them out thing, and we waited for Sam to do the commercial. Well, all went very well. Sam was very, very professional. He did this commercial, and Sam went in the last spiel about about the big boys, right? The camera gets a close-up of the big boys, and I, with a big smile on my face, cued them to eat. You have never seen food come out of people's mouths as fast as that. All except the little Jewish kid. The little Jewish kid, he must have thought back in his ancestor, you know, Joshua, whoever, I'm going to tough this through, you know. When we got out of Egypt, I can get out of this. And he's toughing it out. He's chewing like this. The camera's, already get rid of the camera's panning all this time, right? The football players are going, the Jewish kids do like this, and Sam doesn't have any idea this is happening. He's thinking, look, he's really great, and these kids are strangling behind. Monday, Frisch is canceled. Sam always wondered why. But I have to say, he was then and still is now a solid professional in his field. Sam, of course, shares kinship with John Y. Brown. They both have more famous wives named Phyllis. And so here, let me introduce to you Sam Gifford, excuse me.
And as governor, I was really looking forward to tonight because I thought for once even French would introduce me by the right name. You'd be surprised at how long it's been since I've been introduced properly. I'm either introduced as Joe Knight, the late Joe Knight, you understand, or Frank Gifford. Frank Gifford, I don't mind. He's making a lot of money. But I really was surprised to see French up here tonight. He must have hired a writer, because it doesn't sound like the stuff he's using on the air all the time. I expected a roof lighting commercial, you know. French really did a super job. I'd like to... There's only one problem with asking an old man like me to remember anything. It's to remember anything. And I was trying to figure out, you know, all of you think about high varieties, and I'm delighted because I have a lot of fond memories of high varieties as well. But a lot of you may not know that Dave has been really instrumental in practically everything we've done at the studio. He's done an awful lot of basketball games. He's instrumental in our derby coverage and increasing our derby coverage to the extent that it is today. And producing the Crusade for Children, in addition to high varieties, and a lot of other things. Can you imagine a man having omelet 5 days a week for 10 years? And he did, and did it very well. But there are a lot of things I really think you don't know about Dave. There's a way he handled me on the air, and I don't, you know, I've never told anybody this before, but he was tough, you know. I mean, after all, I was program director, I was boss, and Dave was a director, and I'd get down there on the floor and get ready in rehearsal and go through some things, and in the middle of rehearsal, I'd walk in and tell an act. I said, now, when you make that move, I want you to move from here over to here, and his voice comes down through the audio system. I'd like to remind you that I'm the director on this show. And he was. And I think I learned it. I mean, he had to tell me 4,000 or 5,000 times, but I really learned it. And on the Crusade for Children, which is really a bear to produce, in the last few years, he really gave me quite an assignment. He had me as a middleman, really. He always wanted me there on rehearsals on Saturday afternoons, because he was dealing with people like Johnny Schrader and Mel Owen and Diane Carroll and some of these other stars. And for some reason, every so often, Johnny Schrader, bless his heart, used to get a little testy, on high varieties particularly. And when things needed to be changed a little bit, Dave would come over and say, I think you want to tell John that we need to cut this out, or I don't like that tempo. And I say, Dave, why don't you tell? No, you tell him, Sam. So I was, and I had to tell Mel Owen to stop smoking cigars in the studio. And And also, he let me carry Doc Severance's trumpet all during Saturday afternoon. He gave me a lot of nice things like that. Also, I was in charge of Patsy Bluer. I don't know if you've ever seen Gypsy, but you know how Ethel Merman is off stage saying, "Sing out, baby Jill." This was the way that Patsy Bluer always was trying to keep her dancers in step and in tempo, and the cameras seemed to get in the way lots of times. But those were some of the chores that Dave gave me. Out at Churchill Downs, he really didn't care for that too much, doing the races on Derby Day, because he didn't think it was such a good show. He felt that every race should be a photo finish, and after the 7 races weren't, he didn't want to do it anymore. But we did have an awful lot of fun, and I wonder whether any of you realize that we auditioned. I don't know how many Dave sat in on, but I think he sat in on about half of them. We auditioned over 11,000 kids for High Varieties. And I think Dave sat in on about half of them. And he had impeccable taste. He always agreed with my decision. But I do thank you for inviting me tonight. He's a real friend.
Thank you, Sam. We all kind of miss those good old days, don't we? That was fun. Bob Comstock was one of those rare people who kind of were in the early years and in the later years too. He kind of was in the transitional period all the way, almost to the end. And when I was toward the end of my tenure, and Bob came in, and he sang second tenor a little bit, baritone a little bit, and I thought at first it was because he was so versatile. And then I realized it was because he only had a 5-note range, and Dave didn't know what else to do with it. So I wanted to find out. I knew that Dave has a genius for using people and their best capabilities, and Bob was no exception. And you look through all the tour itineraries, you can see that Bob was consistently in charge of setting up risers. He probably set up more risers than anybody in the history of the civilized world. And now he's graduated. We're going to let him actually talk. Bob Comstock.
Thank you, Rich. It's very nice. I enjoyed particularly hearing in your little beginnings about the group when it was very, very young, and all the activities that went on during tour. It kind of reminded me, you wonder when you get a little older whether your mother and dad actually fooled around. And I kind of think of you like my mother and dad. There are a lot of fond memories, especially at tour. One in particular comes to mind. Bob Epler probably remember this quite well. Tour to Colorado. We had a pleasure of staying in a very nice cabin. It's a little cool outside. Snow was up to our waist. That wasn't so bad because I really do like snow. The bad part was the bathroom was outside. And boy, you're talking about waking up in the morning. It would really wake you up. What I remember, a lot of fond memories of Dave. We still see each other quite a bit. We had the pleasure of attending St. Paul together. But in our latter years, we started doing some Anita Kerr numbers, which had a tape background. And Dave always liked to fill around with the tape machine. You never knew what the volume was going to be. You just started off and all of a sudden, whoo, or you couldn't hear it. And there was always that distinct possibility that when we were getting ready to sing "Oh, How He Loves You and Me," who knows, it may be Guitar Singing that comes on. I want to thank you, Brent, for asking me to come up here. Some of you all have already said a lot of things that I was going to say. Again, you all did a lot of the things back in the old days that we did in the latter days. Instead of the Roberts, we had the Doyles. They didn't need a hammock, though. They just used the risers. So, again, thank you very, very much, Dave. I love you.
Another great Motet tradition lives on. When I got out of the group, well, the next year I was watching the Crusade, and I noticed that Dave was doing something a little differently. Between each of the numbers, he had this guy with a super voice come on and introduce the next thing. You know, I thought to myself, gee, this guy's got to be in the radio business. And a great set of pipes. Fantastic. It was a great addition. I really enjoyed it. So the next day I saw Dave at work, and I said, who is that guy you got doing your announcing? He's great. He's a tremendous voice. He said, well, that's Bob McDonald. I said, good heavens, what is his secret? And he said, well, let me see. He's got two things that ought to be broads. Of course, he meant vocal cords. And what did you think I meant, Bard? Please, let's keep the level of conversation up. No, Bob has a tremendous voice, and Bob has, like most people with tremendous voice, likes to listen to it. He's the only one I know that has an echo chamber in his own house in each room. Celia says he tapes the conversations around house and plays the back. Pass the salt, Celia. God, doesn't that sound good? Let's listen to the real thing now. Bob McDonald.
Since everything has been kind of funny, I thought I would be a little more serious than most people who have been up here this evening. I have been doing this kind of thing, I guess speaking for a living, off and on for a good many years now. And I find that the older I get, the more difficult it is for me to do this. As a matter of fact, the problem is that more and more little things seem to distract me, create a problem when I'm speaking in public. And, excuse me just a minute, there's a distraction right now. There seems to be a slight glare. Just a moment. Thank you. I think that seems to have solved the problem. I've been talking to a lot of people, as a matter of fact, over the last several months, and they have asked me in different ways the same question. It goes something like this: have you talked to Dave recently? No. Well, you don't know if he's thinking about starting up Motet again or not, do you? No, I really don't know that. However, I do have maybe a hint for you about what's going on as far as what's taking place in Dave's mind, and you can interpret this any way you want to. But I happened to see him in the checkout line at the grocery just the other day. And if you're familiar with what's there at the checkout line, among the many things that are there for you to spend your last few pennies on are the tabloid magazines. I saw Dave looking very closely at this one particular headline, and maybe you've seen it on the tabloid. It said, newborn baby sings like Elvis. He was looking at that very closely, so I want you to just kind of keep that in mind, if you will, and maybe that's a hint about what Dave is thinking. You know, Bob Comstock kind of started a tradition in this group, which I'm sure that a lot of you are aware of, or perhaps which you participated in. And that is, on tour, we usually manage to find, if we were in a major city, a very nice restaurant in which to have a meal that could fit in with the schedule and so on. Probably one of the most memorable, which Margaret Crystal reminded me of last night, was that famous meal which we had at Reed Gauche in Washington. One which, rumor has it, cost $200 per person. Now, I want you all to know that secretly, if you really stop and think about it, Dave Jones has gourmet tastes as well. For instance, if you'll think about tour a little bit, I think perhaps you'll realize what the situation is. For instance, can you remember those stops where you had Big Mac a la Ronald, or perhaps Roy Rogers roast beef a la Trigger? And then probably the most memorable meal of all was mini pearl fried chicken on a straw hat with flaming price tag. Dave has really enjoyed all those meals, and we thank him for them. I think that perhaps it would probably be okay with Dave if I let one little secret out of the bag tonight, and that is that he got a phone call the other day from someone who apparently admires Dave very much, and as a matter of fact, whom Dave also seems to admire. Marie Osmond gave Dave a call just the other day. You may not know this, but in the fall on the TV schedule, Marie Osmond is going to be co-hosting Believe It or Not. Now, as I said, Dave has always appreciated Marie. He said that he thought that she had some of the finest he'd ever seen. I'm talking about her teeth now. Anyway, she did call up Dave and ask him if he would consider perhaps having some pictures taken, a tape session for Believe It or Not, because he is the only man that the folks that produce the show know of who can direct in one tempo with his hands and beat an entirely different rhythm with his feet. I think it's really been a stimulating evening for all of us. I think it's fantastic that we've been able to sit at the table and have such stimulating conversation. I know at our table we've really had a stimulating evening. Gary Hathaway has been there, which of course has really added to the evening for us, all of us sitting at our table. As a matter of fact, at one point during the evening, this has nothing to do with Dave, but it's honestly true now. We were discussing Cincinnati, and Sonny turned to Gary and she said, "Do you know why they call it the Queen City?" And Gary just kind of blinked, and he looked at her, and he said, "Is this a joke?" Dave, we love you. Thank you very much for all the many years. Thank you.
Our last guest of the evening is David Doyle, representing David. Now, I have to confess, until I talked with him today, I had never met David Doyle. But I knew he was my kind of guy. Anybody who would put on his little sheet list of activities and hobbies, making storm windows and selling dope to preschoolers, there was a kindred spirit there for sure. David, it's also said on his sheet he had something to do with the insurance division of Kmart. I had to think about that for a minute. Would you buy insurance from Kmart? I would read the small print very carefully. You get life insurance that pays off only if you're hit or killed while you're standing on the top of the house in a driving rainstorm hit by a rhinoceros. They pay off on that. Or watch out for their auto insurance too. You're fine if you get hit while you're parked in your driveway by a runaway Winnebago driven by a defrocked nun. Covers that just like a blanket. Well, they have one thing that David told me they're trying to be more competitive, and they've come up with some new lines. Ann Roberts was very interested in one of the lines that David was talking about. It's orgasmic insurance. It's if Larry doesn't perform, Kmart pays off. And she kind of liked that. So there's a future, and here he is, David Doyle.
Kmart doesn't pay off, I do. I really don't understand why they asked me to talk this evening, because I'm not known for talking much. I made a few notes, so please bear with me if I look at them real quick. I was born in 1960. No. Wrong speech. Copies will be sold later. Dave Jones knows. I was asked to recall some things about the group, and Dave, it's kind of like agony and ecstasy. You figure out which one Dave fits into. I owe Dave quite a bit. I met Jeannie in the group. We got married, had 2 kids, every charge card known to man, mortgaged up to my eyeballs. Thank you, Dave. I love you. You know, Dave is always a caring, I've always known Dave to be a caring individual. In fact, I heard him on the phone the other day talking to the director of the Bach Society. He said, I'll trade you 2 good altos for a mediocre tenor and 20 kazoos. I thought about doing some hair jokes, Dave, but there isn't any. I was real glad to see Dennis Judge this weekend. I was really upset with myself over the weight I had gained until I met Dennis. I worried about it anyway. Barry Buchanan is videotaping this whole weekend, and he's using it as a motivational before film for Weight Watchers. But some of my fondest memories are of tour, as most of us. Dave was great on tour, fighting for the floor on the bus at night. If you can imagine this might bring back some memories. All right, folks, we're now going to tour the Smithsonian Institute, probably the largest museum of history and science. It's now 3 o'clock. Be back on the bus at 4. You know, everybody should get the opportunity to take a tour before they get married, because you really find out what people are like after an all-nighter on the bus. Anyway, you remember this as you pull into a restaurant, Dave would say, okay, we're now going to hand out $1 for your meal. White Castle. That's where the green wave came from. But just think a minute, Dave Jones on tour 2001. As we approach our tour vessel, the Greyhound Galactica, you could hear Dave say, beam us aboard, Ozzy. He'd probably give us 2 hours to tour Mars. At any rate, seriously, Dave, I think I speak for all of us. God loves you, and so do we.
The speakers tonight have really had a difficult job, because what we did, we asked them to do 1 or 2 things that stuck in their minds. And if you've been in the group longer than just a few months, or all kinds of things, so the selectivity process had to be different. And when I started doing this, I kind of asked myself the same question. You know, if someone asked me to explain the Motet singer's experience, what would you do if you could just do one thing? And I thought for a minute, and what came to mind, you know, wasn't any of the craziness or the funny things that happened at all. It was a tour. It was a tour that started out like any other tour, I guess. It was toward the southeastern part of the United States. I don't remember too many of the stops on it. But this tour was a little different than most tours. It started out kind of bad and got worse. And I don't know what the problem was. It just that, you know, no one got along. And it got more tense and more nasty and more ugly. And usually when things like that happen, and they sometimes did, Dave or the chaperones would know what to do to fix it. But they were kind of helpless. It just kind of got worse, and it got more nasty and more ugly. And there were sopranos who weren't speaking to other sopranos, and altos weren't speaking to the entire soprano section. And of course, the tenors and basses, we hardly ever got involved in that kind of stuff because, you know, guys, that it was on a tour. You know, all you wanted was a warm body to cuddle with. You didn't care sometimes who it was, as long as it was a warm body. You didn't get messed around with that stuff. But even the guys got kind of involved in it, and there was even the humor of that particular tour that started out had a cynical and a rough and a nasty edge to it. Now the concerts started out to be, I guess, okay. I mean, mechanically they were pretty good, but there was a lot of things missing. I suppose that we got through it musically, but the tension was there, and the uncomfortableness was there. Well, I think it was the second or third concert, and by that time things had really gotten bad. You could almost cut it with a knife. People weren't speaking to each other, and when they spoke to each other, it was to say something nasty. And concerts were becoming more and more difficult to sing. One night in a small town in South Carolina, we did the first group, and it was just pure hell getting through it. You could, as I said, you could cut it with a knife. It was just like everyone was on edge, ready to explode outward at any moment. And I'm not sure how we got through it, but it was just the world's most nasty feeling, particularly for those who had been on tour before and never had that kind of experience and couldn't put our finger on what was happening. Well, we went back in the dressing room between the groups, and I'm not sure who started talking. And I guess it isn't important. As a matter of fact, I can't remember exactly all the things that were said, but I think the general gist of it was, for heaven's sakes, people, think about why we're here. I think we said the first part of this thing, you cannot judge Motet singers in strictly musical terms. It was never Dave's intention to do that. And we were performing all the notes and the words and the dynamics correctly, but there was nothing to it. It was a hollow, empty experience. And I think what was said during that time was kind of a reassessment of where we were. And people talked you didn't expect to talk. Things were said you did not expect to hear. Now, if this was a Hollywood story, there would be somebody like who would jump up and say, let's win this one for the Gipper, and we'd all run out and do the second group, and that's the way it would end. But that isn't what happened. Because when we went out to do the second group, I think there were a lot of things left unsaid, and no one really knew what was going to happen. Well, we got out there, and I guess it was about the second, third piece. I don't remember exactly. And again, I don't remember who started. A lot of things I don't remember about it. I think it was some soprano who started crying first, and it spread, not like the Green Wave, but it certainly spread. And pretty soon everyone was bawling their eyes out. Well, except a couple of us who were so macho, we weren't going to cry no matter what. But it was like an experience that may have been embarrassing to some extent, the whole rest of the group. And certainly, probably it wasn't the greatest music this group ever sang. It's really tough to sing and do what Dave wants you to do with your blubbering, which everyone was. But it was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had in terms of healing. When the entire group was ready just to kill each other, individually and in groups, kind of came together. Not a word was spoken. There was no sermon. It just kind of happen. And of course, after the thing was over, and of course you're wondering all the time about their host, and they're looking at you and thinking, what are these people doing? They're all blubbering, they're crying their eyes out. They didn't know exactly what was happening until later. And of course, after the thing was over, there was a great hugging and handshaking, and the process was completed. And that was the story that I would tell you. I don't know. I don't know how to translate that. There are some of us who would say, who are particularly solid in their faith, who would say that the Holy Spirit somehow was present at that time and performed a healing. There may be others who would say, well, it was a kind of a mass hysteria kind of thing, and there are reasonable, logical, psychological explanations for it. There are others who might say, well, I don't know. And I don't know either. And I don't think that's important, really. What was important is that those of us, especially me, I really can't speak for anybody else, but we took away from that evening in Greenwood, South Carolina, something that stayed with most of us all our lives. And that is, it is impossible to sing words that have their basis in Christian love when you have hate in your heart. And if someone came up to me and said, Bowden, tell me what all those years in the Motet Singers was really like. Was all the rehearsal and all the sweat and strain, was it worth it? I can look back to that one moment in Greenwood, South Carolina and say, yeah, it was all worth it. So with that, here's a little postscript. David, would you come forward, please? Nancy? As most of you know by now, something you've contributed to. You can go ahead and sit down. It's been a long night. A book of Motet memories, as it were, full of comments and from you all and pictures of us all. It's kind of a memento which we felt that Dave might find of use. And in presenting it, I guess this is the hardest thing of the whole evening for me to do, because how do you sum up 28 years in a sentence or two? Can't, even a gift is inadequate to express it. And I guess the best way I can give this to you, Dave, is to say, have we all, one of the interesting things about this reunion is we kind of look at each other and back at ourselves and our lives, those of us who are in the OF table up in the front, and we think, gee, where's life gone? And I think you realize at this point that not all of us are going to be President of the United States, or a top draft choice in the NBA, or a commentator on a major television network. But we all like to think we make some kind of contribution in our lives. And so, David, this represents your contribution, not just to all of us here who love you dearly, not just to all of those who were members of the group and couldn't be with us tonight, but also for those thousands and thousands upon people who your music has touched throughout the years that all of us may never know about. Dave, with love, here it is.
Thank you. I know I'm going to spend many nice moments looking through this. Now I know why all the pictures were taken down. All these smiling, sweet faces. I want to thank you for this moment. I didn't know it was going to end up being about me. I thought we were just going to have a reunion. But you all are very special to me. You know, people have asked over the years, they've asked me, what is Motet? And I couldn't come out with the big phrase they have in the dictionary. To me, Motet is love. The past 4 or 5 years haven't been very kind to me. I've gone through a very bad divorce. I've just lost my job. But you heard the hymn, Love Lifted Me. Well, that's what you've done for me tonight. Thank you.
As always, it is an impossible act to follow, so we will not attempt. There, a matter of business, there have been requests that there will be some group pictures taken, which can be available to those. It's impossible to take them every single year. We'll be here all night, but we thought maybe it'd be better. Jimmy is going to take them kind of up here, and we thought we'd do them kind of in 5-year increments, maybe starting with 54 through 60, and then 61 through 65 or whatever, 60 through 65, something like 54 through 59, then every 5 years thereafter. So what we'll kind of do is kind of start from scratch, and then if you're overlapped, just stay here. Someone also thought it'd be a good idea before we do that, so we all can remember what year we were in. And for some of us, you have to scratch it. Let me think, when was that? As a refresher course, that we kind of go through it chronologically, like for the first year, and if you go year after year, and if you're still in it, stay up, and if you're not in it, sit down, and you get your back in it, get back up, and all be kind of fun. So have a look around when you see all these people, and maybe make you remember what happened. So other than 1954, how many in 1954 people? Stand up, just stand up. You got to stand up. You have to stand up. 1955 gets bigger. A Motet. 1956, 1957, 1958, 1959. Okay, now if any of you stood up during that, can you remember that far back? If you stood up, that'll be the first picture taken. We keep on saying 1960, 1961. Ooh, lost it. Oh, wait a minute, there wasn't any group there. There was one year there wasn't a group. Oh well. Details. 1962, 1963, 1964, 1965. You were in the second group. And you were in all those years. You get that picture taken twice. 1966. 1967. 1968, 1969, 1970. Ooh, look at that. That's the midpoint. Third. 1971, 1972, 1973, 1974. So I keep bouncing up and down. Couldn't you people make up your minds? I want to be in, I don't want to be in. 1976. Oh, I'm sorry. Time flies, we're having fun. 1975. Forgot about that. Okay, that's the next group. 1976. Not much change. 1977. 1978. 1979. Nobody came. Everybody left. 1980. 81. 82. Was that it? That's it. And that's the last year. Thank you all. See, after we get the pictures taken, or while we get the pictures taken, I guess the next thing is dancing and music. Correct, committee? Oh, I have one more thing I forgot to do. Forgive me. I would like anyone with a Louisville contingent who is involved in this labor of love, of getting this function together. And it was labor of love, but it sure was labor. And a long time bringing it forth. Would you please stand up so we may applaud you? Applause is nice. Try to say something to him personally before you leave, because reunions are always difficult. This one was a bear because of all the various years, and we certainly appreciate it. Okay, well, we're going to have, that's true, committee, we're going to have dance music, right? Even some slow stuff for the senior citizens. And while this is going on, we'll start with the first group line up against the wall where you'll be shot. Choreographically speaking.